What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to here's what people ate to survive during World War II. And I mean, I know there was rations and stuff in England. I don't know if they were throughout the world. Maybe they were. I mean, I think this is from the US perspective. American students, yeah, it's from the US's perspective. And I mean, I don't know how different it was there in terms of eating food and stuff, and like, was there rations and all those kind of things. We're gonna see. Let's check this video out. If you want more of this kind of stuff, let me know in the comments. And yeah, let's just jump into it.
During World War II, Americans were asked to make sacrifices to support troops overseas. People changed jobs, took on new responsibilities at home, and even changed their diets. The military got the best food, while everyone else tightened their belts and found ways to make do. But instead of grumbling about it, people got creative. So, today, we're going to take a look at what people ate to survive during World War II. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, we'd appreciate it if you would leave a comment and let us know what other food-related topics you would like to hear about. Okay, get your bib. It's time to chow down on some World War II vittles.
Food rationing helped the war effort.
As World War II kicked into high
So there was
gear,
rationing there. I mean, that might be a stupid question. I just didn't realize it would be there as well, because I don't know. I just assumed it would have been in the US. I don't know why.
the United States government quickly realized that the military would be competing with the general population for resources like food, metal, rubber, paper, and various other materials. In order to make sure the armed forces got what it needed to win the war, a system of rationing was imposed. Here's how it worked. The government gave every citizen, adults and children, a certain number of points. Those points would then have to be spent, along with money, on any item restricted for use in the war effort. So, for example, in 1943, a pound of bacon would cost 7 points, in addition to its monetary price, which was about 30 cents. The points took the form of stamps, which the government would distribute in books. The Office of Price Administration, or OPA, would have volunteers distribute the books and explain their purpose to merchants and consumers alike. The first product to be rationed was tires, followed by automobiles and then gasoline. Then, in May 1942, the government began putting food products, including sugar and...
So they started rationing other items first before food. I didn't know that. Maybe that's the same with the UK at that point then. They didn't just ration food, it was rationing a lot of important items, which I didn't know.
Coffee on the list. A few months later, meats, fish, canned milk, fats, and cheeses were also deemed restricted. Anytime a new item was added to the list, hoarders would clean the stores out, leading to shortages. Inevitably, many of the restricted goods would be traded on the black market. Despite these problems, though, the system functioned well enough. Similar restrictions were also imposed in the homelands of America's European allies. With so many basic staples being rationed, the public was going to have to get creative with cooking.
Wartime sponge cake.
Sponge cake is a simple delicacy and, although many people don't realize it, it's actually been around since the Renaissance. The secret to its staying power is that it's delicious and easy to make. But during World War II, the ingredients, flour, sugar, butter, and eggs, were in heavy demand by soldiers. Eggs and sugar were especially in short supply in grocery stores around the world. The Welsh version of the sponge cake had to be made sans eggs, but with a lot of margarine, syrup, and milk. Jam was usually spread in the middle of the cake's 2 layers. It wasn't as fluffy as what modern diners are used to, but if cooked properly, it still took on a golden hue.
Flour sour cream.
During World War II, a sobering 25% of the population of Poland was wiped out in the fighting. Germans snatched up all their land, which meant the Polish people had to do their best with what limited ingredients they still had access to. Not every meal, however, was a thing of drudgery. Potato flour sour cream, for example, was meant to be served with blueberry dumplings, which was a favorite of Polish children. The sour cream was made of milk, sugar, and potato flour, which, some of you will no doubt note, is similar to a standard recipe for whipped cream. Maria Karpovichova, a woman who
I thought it was like supposed to be sour cream, and they were having it with blueberries or whatever. I was so confused.
grew up outside of Warsaw, collected World War II Polish recipes instead of the potato flour sour cream. The kids indulge themselves because they can cover the dumplings with a copious amount of the cream.
Mock fish fillet. So fake
In
fish.
England, cooks did their best to keep some semblance of dietary normalcy. One of the ways they did this was by frying what came to be called mock fish fillets. The fillets were cooked in the same way as an actual fish fillet, but with rice. To make mock fish fillets, they mixed rice and egg into a half-inch thick pan of fried rice, chilled it, then cut it into fillets. They breaded the fillets, if bread was available, and then they were fried again until they had a golden appearance.
What, did that work?
Demand
I guess
for meat.
in those times, bro, you'd do anything just to have sort of any sort of taste of what you used to eat. So I can understand that, but mock fish fillets.
During World War II, as one could imagine, was extremely high. Those on the front lines received most of the meat, so things had to change back home. Restaurants started using meatless menus on certain days of the week, and advertisers took to sharing meatless recipes, including things like creamed eggs over pancakes and walnut cheese patties. Home chefs, for their part, started coming up with new and interesting ways to stretch what they had, or they just outright created new recipes. For example, a staple of the early 20th century was meatloaf, made from ground beef and various ingredients
Never had it.
formed into a loaf.
This is what I think of as the most American dish. Like I used to see it on like Johnny What was the show where they used to have meatloaf and they hated it? As a child, I used to watch it. Was it Johnny Test? There was a show on Cartoon Network that I used to watch, and whenever they had meatloaf, it was always mentioned, and they hated it. And I never actually saw what it looked like. To see this is what it looks like inside, I would not have guessed it. But I mean, it just looks like a big sausage with some random brown things in it.
And baked. Century was meatloaf, made from ground beef and various ingredients, formed into a loaf and baked. But during World War II, cooks began substituting vegetables to make an economical meal. Rather than ground beef, this loaf contained a cup of peas, a cup of mashed potatoes, and a can of condensed tomato soup. It wasn't quite the same as a real meatloaf, but it was an efficient way to get some vegetables and use leftovers.
Bubble and oh, we all know Bubble and
A
Squeak.
big part of rationing was using leftovers to make food
I didn't know it was
last
from the war though. Bubble and Squeak came from the war.
as
Did not
long
know
as
that.
possible. So a lot of meals were basically thrown together from odds and ends. Bubble and Squeak, for example, wasn't one specific kind of recipe, although there was one basic necessity: mashed potatoes. During rationing, potatoes remained widely available because they were easy to grow. Best of all, from a cooking perspective, they took on whatever flavors were impressed upon them. When used in Bubble and Squeak, mashed potatoes turned every dinner into a kind of potato pancake, usually filled with whatever meat and veggies were around.
Bean
Baking
cake.
without flour may sound damn near impossible, but when this staple was scarce, people living in occupied Poland found various ways to make do. In many cases, this meant using beans instead of flour. Of course, beans don't have the same taste or consistency as flour, but when boiled down and minced, they become malleable and can be sweetened and worked into a cake. Beans also don't taste anything like flour. Rather, they have an earthy flavor. But the creative Polish chefs had a fix for that too. Namely, they added 6 tablespoons of sugar to the recipe, so it was probably quite tasty.
What the hell? Bean cake?
Vegetables were plentiful in America during World War II, mainly because they couldn't be sent to the soldiers. Fresh fruit and veggies were impossible to ship overseas without spoiling, so Americans were told to fill up on them. Eventually, the government even began to urge citizens to plant their own so-called victory gardens, reasoning that if the people were able to grow and can their own vegetables, it would free up more factory space for war-related manufacturing. Onions are a prime example of a vegetable that was easy to grow and extremely hardy, and in the 1940s, cooks began stuffing them with various ingredients. Grape nuts, everybody's favorite bland, eardrum-piercing cereal, which for the record contains neither grapes nor nuts, and is actually made from wheat and barley, was an American staple at the time, even though most people
Oh, okay. For a second, I think there was actual onion in that. Oh, mate.
still consider this cereal tasteless. It still has its uses in the kitchen. For one, it gave a stuffed onion a consistency similar to an onion stuffed with ground beef.
Oh, so it is. What?
With the right amount of spices, this dish might even make a tasty appetizer today.
I mean, it actually doesn't look that bad. It's probably very oniony, but actually, it's too much onion, isn't it? If there was like half an onion and then you got a bit more potatoes, then yeah, I'm happy with that. But there's no way someone could enjoy having this much onion as the main dish. Obviously, back in when World War II was going on, I can understand it. But nowadays, surely no one would go for this kind of dish. There's no one who loves onion this much, surely.
appetizer today. Coffee is a must-have for many people, but during World War II, pretty much every coffee bean in America was shipped overseas, making
Really?
coffee one of the hardest things to ration. In what will sound like the ultimate nightmare in today's era, where at least one Starbucks is on every corner, Americans were limited to going through 1 pound of coffee every 5 to 6 weeks. That meant they were drinking less than 1 cup a day. The horror. Americans who absolutely had to have a cup of joe started making Roosevelt coffee, which was named for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president at the time. Roosevelt coffee was really just coffee made with reused grounds. It was typically pretty watery and was likely a mediocre substitute for the real thing, but people got creative with it. Sometimes ingredients like chicory and postum were mixed with the coffee. The chicory added spice to the coffee, while postum is a coffee substitute made of wheat bran, wheat, molasses, and maltodextrin.
Braised beef tongue?
A cow's tongue is huge, rubbery, and tough. Not exactly a thing a typical American family sits down to enjoy if they had any real alternatives. But during World War II, American families were only able to buy meat products such as tongue and feet, which made for interesting twists on classic dishes. Beef tongue, for example, wasn't just served as a big tongue on a plate. Instead, it was presented in something closer to a casserole. Braised beef tongue will be fairly recognizable. One modern recipe calls for carrots, onions, celery, and tomato sauce, plus the tongue. To get the tongue into an edible consistency, it had to be boiled for 2 hours, then baked for another 2, in a casserole surrounded by vegetables.
I could never. Spit soup.
Spit soup probably doesn't have the most appealing name in the history of culinary
No.
innovations, but the dish itself is actually tasty. The soup was created in occupied Poland as a way to make use of excess barley. Poles no longer had access to many of the foods that made their cuisine so rich. Proteins like oysters and anchovies were off the table, as were items as simple as chestnuts. So to survive during World War II, Poles made a soup out of barley, a hearty cereal. But why did they give the dish such an unappealing name? Well, it came about because while eating the soup, they had to spit out the husks.
Oh.
Chopped liver is a traditional Jewish recipe that uses schmaltz and gribenes, or chicken fat and cracklings, to fortify the chopped liver that makes up most of the dish. During World War II, Jewish families were advised to stretch out their food rations, which might mean using breadcrumbs to reinforce meals or making a vegetarian version. This vegetarian version of this dish was made using fresh fruits and vegetables, and whatever else may have been growing in victory gardens. Home chefs often swapped out the meat for green beans, peas, onions, crackers, and hard-boiled eggs, if eggs happened to be available. You're probably thinking that sawdust in this context
Sawdust? Again, is this just the name deceiving me, or is it actual sawdust in the food?
is the name for some sort of food, but it's not. It's just regular, ordinary sawdust. You see, people living in England and Germany during World War II didn't have the vast fields of wheat America enjoyed, so they mixed what little they had with actual sawdust.
Oh my god, I never knew about this, and I'm from England. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. If it helps fill your stomach, then fair enough, but what?
Which was sometimes euphemistically called tree flour. One German recipe for black bread called for half rye grain, 2 parts sliced beefs, 2 parts sawdust, and 1 part minced leaves and straw. Everything was mixed together and baked like normal. It doesn't really sound too yummy, but hey, in times of war, you eat what you have to survive.
Yeah.
So what do you...
Damn, sawdust food. Fuck me, they went through it. I mean, we knew that anyway, but god damn. I was a little girl during World War II. Fruit was something we never got. The corner grocery store gave me an orange once. He said that he'd gotten a small amount of fruit and was giving a piece of fruit to the children that came in with parents that were regular shoppers there. I still remember getting that orange. I was thrilled. I must have been a precious moment to me, because 80 years later I still don't remember him handling. I still remember him handing me that orange. That's a nice story, man. That's a really nice story. My parents were married in 1946. The war was over, but rationing was still in place. After the war, my grandmother had to save up sugar ration tickets to give the baker for the wedding cake. Pictures of the cake show it wasn't covered with frosting, but had a few frosting rosettes on it. Man, these days we Americans don't truly realize how spoiled we are. All of us, mate. I mean, you see this and see what people have to go through. God damn, but sawdust bread or cake or whatever it's called, that is brutal. But yeah, if you want some more weird history reactions, let me know. And until next time, peace.